I'm going to present my job market paper. It's called Migration and Trust, Evidence on Assimilation from Internal Migrants. And I'm a PhD student from University of Nottingham. Okay, so let me just jump on it. Oops. Okay, so my research question is, do migrants assimilate to the local trust level? Okay, and so if you check in the dictionary the word assimilation, you would see that it says it's the process of becoming similar to others by taking in and using their customs and culture. Okay, so in other words, what I want to look at is whether migrants change their trust in the direction of the locals' average of trust. Okay, so why is this interesting? Well, so there is a lot of evidence of how migration has the potential to increase like global efficiency and decrease inefficiency. And I mean, there are like very many good aspects of migration. I think you already know this, but on the other hand, it could create tensions between the locals and the immigrants, especially if there are like large cultural differences between them. Okay, so and this could also be exploited by politicians who can use this some kinds of anecdotal evidence to create false stereotypes and generate even more polarization. Okay, so this is an important topic to study, and that's the reason I'm looking into this. Okay, so cultural assimilation is not only important on an international level, but also like in many cases, many countries have like strong cultural differences within its borders, right? Like, so if you think of, for example, Germany or Italy, or even in the US, you have like the South, the West, the East. Like there are many countries that have like these cultural differences. And in fact, there are some papers exploring this. For example, Germany was divided for a long period of time. So after the reunification, there is this paper looking at how these migrants that moved from the East, that were under like specific institutions for a long time, how they changed their attitudes towards the government spending when they moved to the West. Okay, so what they see is that there is no really adaptation on these preferences or attitudes about the government. Also in Italy, there is a very strong cultural divide between the North and the South. And there is this paper by Kino and Maggi where they look at shirking behavior in banks, right? Like so, and what they find is that shirking behavior people do adapt, like they go to a new branch, and if people are shirking more, they start shirking a bit more. So there is this kind of evidence also about food in India, and I mean, there is lots of evidence of this in both directions. But so there are reasons for against assimilation. For example, like people might be averse to losing kind of their identity. In fact, many papers look at trust, and they see that there is a very strong component of trust that goes through generations, and even up to the fourth generation, we can still see like some parts of this trust that was passed over time. For example, these papers by Algan and Cahook, that they look at European immigration in the US, and they find that the people that came were people settled from the highest trust countries in the US. Those states grew the most, right? Or then there is this other paper, for example, by Nan and Wanchekon, that they look at the slave trade from Africa. So some places were most affected by this slave trade. So their trust was like very much affected, and that ended up in differences in development even today. Okay. But on the other hand, there are also reasons for assimilating, and this could be like, so if you integrate, if you assimilate to the locals, then you might have an easier way to get into the labor markets, or also people might assimilate just to conform to the social norms, or there are also other mechanisms. This doesn't mean to be an exhaustive list. Okay, so whether migrants assimilate in their trust or not towards the locals is an empirical question. So what is the empirical challenge? So basically, if we observe the migrants having the same trust as the locals, we're not sure whether they have assimilated towards the locals or they just selected those places based on these cultural traits or on their trust. right? So basically what we need to do is disentangle this assimilation from a sorting mechanism. One thing we can do is follow an experimental approach where you try to kind of randomize immigrants, but this is very difficult to implement, right? So, I mean, it's very expensive. There might be ethical reasons involved. You need to interview these immigrants before they move and then track them down in the new places. So it is very hard to do this. Even if you have data on refugees that in some places are randomly allocated, it is usually not like the data before they migrate is not available. So you are not really observing a change in these people. So the other thing you can do is just use some observational data, which would allow us to do a definitive approach. The problem with this is that it requires data on migrants before and after migration, and this is usually not available, not only for international migrants, but also for internal migrants, right? So, I mean, usually this data is not available. So I overcome these problems by focusing on internal migrants in Switzerland. So Switzerland is nice because of two main reasons. One of them is that it has surprisingly large cultural differences in trust between the cantons. And this is despite the small regional space in Switzerland. And on the other hand, we have the Swiss household panel, which allows me to basically follow internal immigrants for a long period of up to 17 years. Okay, so for many migrants, I will observe them for many years before and many years after they migrate from one canton to another. So again, this provides an ideal setting for a definitive approach. Okay. So just an overview of my results. I'm going to show you that migrants increase or decrease their trust in 0.15 standard deviations after moving to a higher or lower trust canton, which is a very strong effect considering that on average, this is the difference between the canton of origin and destination. So basically, they are closing the whole gap in trust. And then I will show you also in the heterogeneity analysis that assimilation is stronger for younger immigrants, which is consistent with the impressionable years hypothesis in psychology that says that basically you are malleable, or your personality or your traits are malleable until you reach a certain age. After that, you are set in your ways. So the contribution is that, I mean, previous papers have studied assimilation. For example,
Diego, one
yes?
quick question. So in this overview of results, have you also analyzed what happened to natives, like to residing natives in that area in terms of their trust?
I'm not looking at the natives. This is something I want to do, but this will be like a completely separate project.
Yeah, I just want to see like maybe the differences is just not maybe they're increasing, but also natives are responding with.
I have some robustness tests for this. I'll show you a bit later. But yes.
Okay, great.
Previous papers that I mentioned that were looking at this assimilation in shirking behavior or in the attitudes about the role of the government have seen either there is assimilation or not. But I contribute by looking into a new one, a trust, which is a more primitive trait that could be explaining this like this behavior, right? Because this is, I mean, it's a more primitive trait. Also, most of the literature shows persistence in trust. I mean, here I'm talking only about papers looking at trust, right? So in all of these papers, they look at different generations. So basically they compare the first generation immigrants with the locals and they find the gap. And then they look at second generation immigrants and the locals, and they find that the gap gets smaller and so on. But there are no papers that I'm aware of looking at first generation immigrants. Okay, so this is something that I also bring to the literature, that I'm observing an actual change within the same person. Okay, and then what I mentioned already about this impressionable years hypothesis, and I provide further evidence about this. So why trust? So according to Alessina and Giuliani in 2015, they say that trust is the most studied cultural trait in general in the literature in economics. If we go back to Arrow in 1972, he says that virtually every commercial transaction has within itself an element of trust. And this you can think like every time you use your credit card or you leave your kids at school or you jump into an Uber, you are basically trusting someone, right? So in basically everything you are doing all the time are like, there's some part of trust involved in this. Okay, so just to give you a definition, I don't want to go too much into the details because it's not the goal of my paper. But trust is broadly defined as an individual willingness to be vulnerable based on an expectation of cooperation. So there are like many definitions of this. Most of them have two components. One of them is the willingness to be vulnerable. Basically, this being open to or exposed to some kind of risk, right? And you do this because you expect some cooperation, and this would be like the parts of beliefs, right? Like, so I may trust some people and some others don't, just because I believe that they will want to cooperate or be good to me, and some others don't. Okay, so these are the two main components, and these are many papers studying trust. Okay. So what is like operationally, what is my measure of trust? And it is the following. It says, generally speaking, would you say that most people can be trusted, or that you can't be too careful in dealing with people? And then the respondents can answer from 0 to 10, where 0 means can't be too careful, and 10 means most people can be trusted. Okay, so just to show you the variation in trust in Switzerland, here you have a map of Switzerland, and the lines would be the borders between all the cantons. And the color means the terciles of the trust. So the dark colors are higher trust. So this is just to show you that there is variation, and even across, like within the same region, the same language region, we'll see the variation. And I will show you a bit better in the next graph, in this one. So here you can see the differences in trust in all 26 cantons. Okay, so maybe you can notice in blue are the German cantons, in red the French, and in green there are the two where they speak Italian as well. So even within the same language region, there are like big differences in trust. Okay, so basically this is going to be my treatment, right? Some people moving from a low to high, or high to low. So what about the data? I'm going to be using the Swiss Household Panel. And this is a survey conducted yearly from 2002 to 2018. It is representative for the Swiss population and tracks people when they relocate to, let's say, they move to a different canton. Trust is elicited every year using the same question. And also internal migrants are interviewed in the same language before and after migration. So if you are an Italian and you are moving to a German part, you are still interviewed in the same language, so in Italian. And the other thing I want to mention about this is that it is very hard to find panel data on trust. So it's actually the only one I could find, because in general, they just do repeated cross sections. Yes,
just a question, Diego. I'm interested on this data. They have information on the nationality status for international migrants?
Yes.
So you could find the exact country, not only if they're like foreigners.
You know the exact country, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so who is going to be the people I'm studying? It's going to be Swiss citizens who move once from one canton to another in this period, from 2000 to 2018. So people who moved within the canton are not considered migrants for my purposes, and this is because there's not enough cultural variation within the canton. And one assumption I'll be making is that the people I observed in 2002 are in their country, in their canton of birth, okay? Because I don't know where they were actually born. This is my first year, so I use that as the baseline, okay? So in my empirical strategy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the sample in two. Some people who are going to move to a higher trust canton, and some people are going to move to a lower trust canton. And I'm going to run a separate analysis for those two, right? And what I'm going to be doing is comparing early and late migrants. Okay, and this is good because instead of comparing with natives, that might differ in many other ways, right? So I'm just going to be comparing two migrants that are moving in the same direction, but just happened one of them moved before than the other. Okay, so this is a staggered diff in diff, and I'm using the method by Callaway and Santana 2021. Okay, So what I'm doing, I'm going to be, what is this method proposing? So I'm going to compute this group time average treatment effect for group M in year T. And here is the notation in potential outcomes. So basically, what I want to do is compare like the potential outcome of the people who migrate in period M to basically themselves have they not migrated in period T, okay? So I'm comparing period T, the potential outcome of those who migrated and those who have not migrated. But this is hypothetical yet, right? So this method has two advantages. One of them is that it is more transparent regarding the comparison groups because we are not using any of the forbidden comparisons. And also the weights are going to be more transparent. That I'm going to speak in a bit. So what I mean by the forbidden comparisons is that I'm not using as a control someone who has already moved, okay? So just to, I can't see this. Okay, so the effect of cohort M in period T. Imagine we have three groups of migrants, some early migrants, and some late migrants that move a bit later, and some late migrants that move a lot later, okay? So you can think of these periods as just period 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just using this to make it a bit more clear in the explanation. So when you see a 1, it means that these migrants have migrated in that period, and it stays in this canton like forever, okay? It's an absorbing state. So my treatment group is going to be the early migrants, those who migrated in period M, okay? And then who is going to be my control group? Then for now, everyone is a potential control group, but notice that in period T, late migrants, 1, have already migrated because they migrated in period T minus 1. So those are not useful for me. So I just delete those. And my control group is going to be late migrants 2, and these people are moving in period T plus 1, right? So because I care about period T, so now they have not migrated yet, okay? And so I want the effect of cohort M in period T. So as a baseline, I'm using the year before cohort M had moved. So I'm going to be using M minus 1. And as the second period in my diff in diff, it's going to be the year T, okay? So now I have these three data points, and I'm going to do a basic diff in diff on this. So
what happens if you use never treated as control group also?
The problem using never treated, I mean, the methodology is nice. You can use never treated, but as long as those are like a good control for the people who migrated, right? But yeah. Non-migrants are like very different from migrants in many ways. Like psychologically, maybe they are more open to less open to change, and many other ways, right?
So maybe even in robustness, like you didn't check it.
I didn't do that.
Okay.
I mean, I could, but I just thought it was like a very different group, so I'm not sure whether.
Because I'm saying this because when you calculate the average trust per canton, I imagine that you use all the people there. So I imagine the never treated group.
For the average trust in the canton, I'm only using the non-migrants. I'm not using any migrant in there.
Any migrant. So I think probably the differences in trust are different, so we can get a different picture.
Yes.
If you measure.
I mean, I can do some check, but maybe it would be nice to find a way, like, kind of to extrapolate my results to non-migrants. But the thing is that, like, maybe yes, they are like very risk averse, or maybe they are less social, or like many things. Probably, I don't want to like conclude too much. So
no, sure. I get your point, but at the end, I think it will be possible, and you can do some matching in terms of observable characteristics that could give you one thing.
Yeah.
Diego, we have one question from a participant asking about data that you may have on other dimensions of trust. So maybe do you have data on either political or institutional trust that you can compare
yes. So
with this generalized trust measure that you have?
So there is a question about trust in the federal government. I did the analysis with that, and I find no assimilation. At the beginning, I was thinking this would be like a nice placebo, but actually, then I'm a bit less confident. So I'm actually thinking of taking it out because I don't really have like a way to explain this. And I don't know, like some people, I thought it was a nice placebo because you can't see the differences between the cantons. It's not that all the cantons have the same, and there is like basically the assimilation is 0. It's like a very precise 0. But this is the only other like important variable I have. Yeah.
I think it's a good placebo test if you have something at the national level, because that's something that all the people are clearly affected the same, more or less, because of course maybe the national government doesn't have the same policies everywhere. But yeah, it's something, yeah, we can discuss about that later, but it could be useful.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Okay, so.
And sorry, just I have a last question about these two groups. So for late migrants to be like a viable control group, did you looked a little bit on the observable characteristic, for instance, the age? Like, are the late migrants systematically like younger or older than the early migrant, or not at all?
They are not different. I'll show you like in the next part.
Okay.
So basically what we are doing here is like doing a diff and diff with just 2 groups, right? But then I could start changing the M or the T, and then you get lots of different diffs, right? So what I'm actually doing is computing like around 300 different diffs, and then we need to find a way to like condense them into some summary statistic, right? So this is, oh, sorry, before that, let me show you. This is the basic diff and diff that I'm running, that I just explained. So this is the baseline average of the control group, okay? And this beta is the ATT that I was discussing before, okay? So now I'm going to have like almost 300 of these ATT or betas, which is a normal coefficient from a treatment effect from a diff and diff regression. And now we want to summarize this somehow. So let me show you how we do this. Basically, this is the thing that we have so many. And now we're going to use different weights. And the weights, it's just going to be the number of people you have in cohort M divided by the number of people that stayed in some place for E periods after moving, okay? This theta S is going to be the, like, you know, when you do an event study, you have like one coefficient for each year, let's say. So those coefficients are going to be these ones, okay? So for each of those years, I'm going to average out like all the cohorts that moved and stayed, for example, for 1 year in the destination, okay? Then I get one of these, which is the first coefficient after they move. Then I'm going to do the same for people who stay 2 years in the new place and so on. All right, so it doesn't matter in which year they moved. All that I care about here is for how long they stayed in the new place. Okay. So this is what I was.
What happened if you moved that more than once? You eliminated from the sample?
Yes, I took them out. There are like maybe 20% of the people moving again, so I took them out, because also this method doesn't allow you to have like switch on and off the treatment.
Okay.
But also like then you have to like, so if I wanted to keep them, then you have to start like making assumptions on how long it takes to assimilate, or like whether this effect is going to keep changing or not. Like imagine you go to a new place, you adapt there, but then you go to another place, and then you need to start adapting again, like in a different direction maybe. So it would complicate the analysis. That's why I just kept this. And then this one is just like basically it's an indicator function that takes the one for those people that stay up to E periods, right? Like imagine that I'm using the cohort 2015, and then I want to observe like 10 years after. Those are not in my sample, so I just have to take them out. Okay, so this is not very important. It's just to get rid of the data I don't have. Okay, so what Melchor asked, this is just a balance test looking at some covariates. This is people moving to a higher trust canton. And you can see that on age, gender, whether they are married, income, education, or the household size, in general, they are very similar. And this is for people going to lower trust cantons. again, like in most cases, they are very similar. Okay, and the difference between early and late movers, what I did is I split the sample in at the median, basically in 2011. Okay, so early migrants is everyone who moved before 2011, and late migrants is everyone who moved after. So now I can show you the results of the event study of these data that I was showing, and this is what we find. So we can see some parallel trends before moving. There's no effect, but then there is a jump even in the first period after they move. Okay, and this is what I was saying, that the effect is basically of the same size on average and the difference between the canton of origin and destination. Okay, and then if we do the same analysis for the opposite, that is people who is going to a lower trust canton, we find the opposite results. Okay, so so far I was using like basically a dummy variable, whether they moved or not, but I'm not really using how much trust or how small trust they have in the destination. So what I can do instead is collapse all the periods before moving and all the periods after moving, so that I have just 2 observations for each person, right? And then I can do a basic diff in diff, where my treatment variable, instead of being a dummy, it's going to be a continuous variable, which is the average trust in the destination country. Okay, so it's just a diff in diff with a continuous treatment. Okay, and why do I do this? I do this because first of all, it allows me to control for time varying covariates. Maybe I want to control for I don't know, income, education, or things that are like really correlated with the trust. Also, it allows me to reduce measurement error, because trust is measured every year, and this is a very like the variance is quite high. So if I can take averages of these for the same person, I reduce a lot the measurement error, and it's easier to explore heterogeneity. Okay, so this is the regression I ran. So this is a basic diff in diff, where trust, I'm looking at trust for individual I in period T, and only 2 periods, right? So I have the individual fixed effect. This is just a trend, and this is the coefficient I care about, right? It's the interaction between the post or the treatment and the average level of trust in the destination. Okay. So what do I find? I find that when, like in the first column, we have the regression with no covariates. What I see is that for an increase in 1 standard deviation of the destination trust canton, immigrants increase their trust in basically half of it, okay, like 0.46. Then if I control for some covariates, I find a very similar coefficient. And then this is what Lucas was asking, but that maybe the immigrants are affecting the locals. So what I do instead is in order to compute the destination trust, the average trust in the destination, what I do is I only use the year 2002. Okay, so this is before any of these migrants have moved. Okay, so and then what I see is very similar results, right? Again, with and without covariates. Then I'm looking at, so how am I doing with the time?
You have 10 minutes left.
Okay, right. I think I was rushing a bit, so it's fine. So then I wanted to look at the heterogeneity analysis in this, and what I'm doing is I'm following this paper by Chernoshikov et al. 2018. Basically, what they propose is to estimate an individual treatment effect. Then you rank everyone by this treatment effect, and then you compare the people most affected and the people least affected. Okay, and so if the treatment is if there is a heterogeneous treatment effect, then those should be different. And this is what I see. And so basically, I'm comparing the 20% that were like affected most, and the 20% at the bottom who were affected the least. And what I see is that the people who were affected the most are around 22 years old, 23 years old, and the people who were least affected were around 60 years old. Okay, so there is the effect of age is quite strong here. Also, the people who adapt the most are more likely to be female, and the people who adapt the least are more likely to be male. Notice that these two don't need to adapt to one, right? Because it's like that's the proportion in that 20%. I also see that the time spent in the canton, so like if they stay 1 year longer, they are more likely to be in the larger group. So, I mean, not the people who assimilated the most are more likely to be 1 year more in the destination than the other group. And then also I check whether the canton of origin or canton of destination trust level matters, and we don't find anything there. Basically, they are very similar. Like the destination canton, it doesn't matter if you are going high or low, or this one is the origin. Also, it doesn't matter in your assimilation. Okay.
Diego, one additional question. So, in this year, how would we think? What's the motivation of people moving? Like, for a younger person, it could be economic conditions. For an older one, who should it be? So, I don't know. Have you think of these differences?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have data, but that could be a reason. Like maybe, I don't know, younger move to study somewhere else, or this is possible. And this was the reason I wanted to control specifically for education and changes in income.
And for instance, like your measure of average trust, if you correlate it with, I don't know, employment rates in each canton, you see a positive correlation. So
I would,
or have you explored that?
I would think so. I didn't do it, but I would expect so.
Yeah, because at the end, like why people should move to lower trust cantons if they are supposedly with lower or worse economic conditions for them.
Yeah,
I just think like there's something that could be good to analyze, like what are the motivations of moving for those people.
Yeah. I mean, how they change their. I just controlled for income, and the effect is still there. But yeah, it could be nice to explore a bit more of the sorting, like why are people moving in different directions. Although I checked, and like basically it's like half of the people are moving higher, half of the people are moving lower. So it's not really like the main thing. Like when you decide to move, like it doesn't really matter the trust level of the destination.
But you're doing the higher and lower depending on your own trust. I'm saying
no, higher and lower depends on your canton versus the destination canton.
Yeah, your own canton versus the destination. But I'm saying the rank across, not like relative to your own, but the rank across all the country.
Yes. So in the rank, you see that basically people, like if you are in a high trust canton, you are more likely to go to another high trust canton, a bit more likely. But if you are in a low trust canton, then you are like 50-50 going either up or down.
Okay, you can go on.
Yeah.
Sorry, okay. I have also a question on this table. On the third line, so time spent in host canton. So if I understand well, people that stay for like 6 years are the least affected, and for 7 years they are the most affected. Or
actually, you should think the opposite. So let's find the people who assimilated the most. Then you get this group, the 20% who assimilated the most, and then you just take the average time spent for them, and then that is 7 years. If you do the same for the other group, then it's 6 years.
Okay, and like, is there an explanation for that? Like, I see the 1 year difference, and like the more you stay, the more you are affected. But
yes,
like, why is it like 7 and 6 and not like I don't know, 5 and 4? Like,
I mean, this is the average in the data.
Just
the only thing I want to show about this is like that
the more you stay, the more
it makes sense with like just common sense, right? Like one would expect that the longer you are, the more that you assimilate.
Okay. Okay, it's a mean, like it's not okay, I understand. Thanks.
Yeah, that's the only thing I wanted to show here. So then this is like a data-driven approach, but then I also, because I found this to be very interesting about the age, so I went to a more traditional approach where I just split the sample in like different ages. That kind of makes sense, you know, like young people would be like people who moved from when they were 14 to 31, from 32 to 49, or from 50 to 90. And the reason I split it in this way is because these are like kind of roughly different times in your life. And also because in this way I have like roughly the same sample size in both in the three groups. Okay, so what we find here is that really most of like almost all the effect is driven by the young people. Okay, and we don't really see a strong effect for the middle age and the older groups. Okay, so just to summarize, I study whether migrants assimilate their trust towards the local average. I exploit a unique opportunity provided by the Swiss context and this detailed internal migrants data that allows me to use a different methodology. I find evidence of assimilations towards higher and lower trust levels at destination. And I explore heterogeneity and find that the migrants who assimilate the most are more likely to be female and younger. So thank you very much for having me and for being here today.
Thank you, Diego. We can, I think, move to the discussion part by Barbora, and then we'll go through questions that other participants may have. So Barbora, if you want to share your slides.
Sure, yeah.
Should I close it? Okay.
Great.
All right, so I hope you can all hear me well. So thanks a lot, Diego, for the very interesting presentation and a great read that I had when I was going through your paper. So just to summarize the project very briefly, you study the question of whether internal migrants assimilate culturally to the locals, and if so, then how? For this, you use the Swiss household panel, which provides very nice data. It's like the longest panel survey, which kind of tracks individuals also before they have migrated, which offers you like this great contrafactual that you so that you can apply an even study approach and diff and diff approach with a continuous treatment. So basically your main outcome variable is trust towards the others, and your treatment captures migration. And yeah, what you basically conclude in your study is that you find evidence of assimilation that is driven primarily by the youngest immigrants and by females, where you show that migrants increase trust after moving to higher trust cantons and vice versa. Just very briefly, but yeah, so I have my discussion is structured in two ways. So first I have a couple of questions, and then I have a couple of suggestions. So my first question is that your definition of migrants focuses on internal migrants. And I can imagine that especially in this kind of or when it comes to internal migration, there is a lot of like people who would not necessarily register as migrants. And I wonder like whether there is a way to figure out whether the issue is major in Switzerland, and if so, how could this affect to the results, and whether it's possible to address this. Maybe there's some official statistics that speak about this, but it would be nice to mention this aspect in the paper. As for the second question is, you use the diff and diff approach as one of the two main methods to analyze your data. And when you draw on the first method, so on the event study design, you address the possibility of negative weights issues, but this can be also a problematic in a two-period diff and diff setup with a continuous treatment. So I wonder whether this is kind of addressed, and I just didn't somehow understood it from the paper, or whether you have thought about this in a way. And then the final question is related to the differences between the 25% who assimilated the most and the least in your study. So yeah, so what I felt like in your discussion of the results, you strongly focus on the changes in terms of you know, like the characteristics of migrants. So like migrants that experienced an income increase after they have moved are most likely to assimilate, or that you focus a lot on this like dynamic effects. But what I found interesting in your table is that actually also the variables pre-migration variables, or that determine the pre-migration characteristics, were significant in your table. And I thought, why not emphasize this issue as well? Maybe you have good reasons for this. I was just wondering, like, what is the reason that you focus more on the changes rather than the kind of self-selection into migration that is obviously also important, for in terms of the assimilation. And then also your variable female in the table that in table 6 in your paper, or the table that we just discussed quite intensely, is the gender is not significant. So it means that the fraction of females in the 25% of those who most assimilated is not significantly different to those who assimilated the least. So I just wonder whether I somehow wrongly read the table or misinterpreted it, or whether you could maybe address this point. Yeah. As for suggestions, what I was missing a bit in the paper was kind of a theoretical section with clearly testable hypothesis, so where you could illustrate you know, a bit like the general idea, what kind of effects you would expect, and what you are testing, and what would be the mechanisms behind. So I thought it could be nice to add this kind of section, and also a point that was also picked up in the discussion at several instances during your presentation, that it would be nice to understand what are the you know, like conditions at the destination that affect the rate of assimilation. So is it really about the convergence of the attitudes, or could it be that, for instance, in the higher trust regions, there are better economic opportunities that kind of affect migrants towards being more towards more trusting, or something like this. So it would be better to understand this whether there is some kind of mechanism behind, or whether there is really simply a convergence of attitudes because there is higher interaction between migrants and non-migrants, or something like this. And yeah, another point is, but this was also already discussed, that it would be nice to see some alternative measures of trust, whether the findings are robust across, you know, across this. And finally, final point is that it would be great to have like an quantitative analysis of the overall trends, so one could see how trust towards the others has changed in the country over the years, and to what extent migration has contributed to these changes, and what this actually means for policies. So I was also missing a bit this aspect. So that's all. Thanks. Sorry, there were some voices. Maybe I missed something.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for all the comments. I don't know if I have time to answer some of them, or
Yeah, I think you can maybe
And-
answer a couple of comments, and then we'll take questions from other
it'd be nice if we can keep the slides so that I can read
Right.
remember the questions.
Okay, so let's
might-
go to the question slide.
Yeah. So for the first question, I actually don't know about this data about unregistered migrants. But the thing is that these people are probably people who were not planning to migrate, but they were part of the survey, and then they moved, and the survey just follows them. So it's not really a concern for me whether they just migrate to a different place and they don't register, because the survey will ask them where they are. Okay. So about the negative weights, I don't really have this issue in the second diff in diff, because I'm just collapsing. I just have 2 periods, either before the move or after the move. So I'm not doing any of the forbidden comparisons in there.
Okay, I mean, I'm not an expert on this. I just know from the literature that even in a 2-period diff and diff, this could be problematic if your treatment is continuous. But I suppose you maybe know better.
Okay, maybe I'll double check that, but yeah, thanks for the point then.
Yeah, maybe just look into it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Then. Yeah, I don't know. So maybe I thought it was like very long, the table looking at all the characteristics. So I wanted to focus on specific things about the people like that build into the story of like who migrate, who assimilates the most and who the least. So, and some things might be correlated between each other. Like, for example, I don't know, people who are poorer at the beginning, before they move, they assimilate more. This is consistent with other literature. For example, I don't know, for example, Tabellini and this paper by Tabellini in Germany, they look at refugees, and what they find is that the people who assimilate the most are the ones who end up in more hostile places. So I feel like it could be related to something of like you need to assimilate to survive, basically. But yeah, I just picked the variables that I think were closer to the story.
I just felt like maybe these changes that you know, like education years before and after moving, like the changes, they relate more to maybe options or opportunities that are offered to migrants once they move. So they're kind of related more to the destinations.
Yeah,
whereas,
that's a good point.
The level, so education once, like at the moment when you are moving, is like kind of related to self-selection into migration. Yes. And then could be also quite policy relevant, because you can better understand what kind of implications that this could have once they arrive, if you expect migrants with a certain level of education or characteristics.
Yeah, that sounds good. Actually, yeah. I can look into it. I mean, the results are on the paper. I don't talk much about those.
Exactly, yeah.
But yeah, that's a good point. Then about gender, yeah, I mean, many things, like also other things in the full table I have on the paper are not significant, but also the sample size is not huge. So that's
how
why,
big is it, if I can ask?
So I think in total I have like 1,200 migrants, but then like when I split the samples, I have like 400 maybe in each. When I split in people moving too high or too low, right. So it becomes very small, and I don't want to like conclude too much from the heterogeneity and stuff like that. That's why I didn't want to split the sample in many other ways. It would have been like really nice, but I just couldn't.
Okay.
So can you go to the last
suggestion?
Yeah, the first question, I would love to be able to answer this. But yeah, I think this is like a first step, like show basically people do assimilate. Then like when they assimilate, we will need like better data than what I have. like to really understand like in which cases they do assimilate, in which cases they don't. Yeah, these are very good suggestions that I tried to address them, but I just couldn't. For example, okay, so for example, whether the regions are more prosperous or not, this is kind of like, I'm just looking at the bundle, right? Like maybe a place have a higher income, maybe there is less crime, maybe there is more trust, like all of these things together. And so I'm looking at basically the effect of all of it combined into the trust of the immigrants, right? So now in a next project, I'm trying to disentangle this, whether migrants are assimilating because other people are more trustworthy or because other people are more trusting. Because there is some evidence that like it's not a one-to-one match, right? In some places, it's not that like, I mean, the correlation of course is positive, but there is a lot of noise. Like some places might have like a very high trusting, but not that high trustworthiness, for example. So in this next project, I'm trying to see like with experimental data, where they basically people play a trust game. I don't know if you're familiar with the experimental literature, but like this trust game in which one person can send some money to the other one, and the second person gets like a multiplied amount of what it was sent, and then they can give something back. So if the first person trusts a lot on the second one, they would send a lot of money because this gets multiplied. And then if the second person is trustworthy, then they would send something back to the first one. So both would profit from it. So then you have a measure of trusting and trustworthiness. Mm-hmm. And then I can do a similar analysis, trying to see whether people are actually assimilating the trust or in the trustworthiness, or both, or maybe they are adapting in the trust because of the trustworthiness of the locals, right? So I'm trying to do this in the next project. And
maybe given the time left, you can take questions. I mean, we have 2 questions from participants. All right. So I think Lucas from the participants had a question. You should be able to unmute yourself to ask it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, Lucas.
So I had a question regarding with regards to the balance test that you have made. I don't remember well, but I've just seen that in the control of age, I've seen that the p-value is rather not so powerful, like it's like 0.10. Yes. And I see that your standard deviation is like 15 to 17 years, so it's close to 1 generation. So my first question is, do you think that this affects your results after? Because I see that in your heterogeneity analysis, you see that the same very standard deviation in your sample follows your results, because I see that you close to 23 years old are the mostly affected by the trust, and mostly 59 years old affected by the trust. So I see that there is a middle generation inside that I don't think you check it. So my question also is if you have checked between those populations, if there is some sort of change in your, like if you zoom your diff in diff, if you can see any change in that, if you affect your results. And the last question is about networks. Have you checked, because I've seen that you have included also only marriage. So if you have included only marriage, so you think that the only connection to this channel that you're trying to find, the mechanism behind the networks, is only the marriage, or something else, like there is the role also of the cultural proximity. If someone speaks the same language, or there is a concentration of networks in a specific province, in a specific canton, perhaps it affects your results. So yes. I'm not so sure about in terms of internal validity. That's the questions I have. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry for the long battle of questions, but thank you very much. It was an excellent project.
Thank you. Very interesting questions. So about the age, when you do this method, you have like this individual treatment effect, and it is, I mean, it is. I wouldn't say it is flat, but it's quite flat. I mean, at the ends, like the people who assimilated the most and those who assimilated the least, you can see this difference. but like in the middle, it becomes like really, really flat. So I don't want to say that there are differences for the middle, people in the middle. I think, yeah, a really nice question is this one about the networks. Unfortunately, so in the first years of the survey, we have a question about whether they meet often with friends, relatives, neighbors, and so on. But then they discontinued the question, unfortunately. So I can't really like see the networks before and after. So you also asked about the language. I didn't check the language because I mean most people were Germans in general, and so the standard errors are very, very large, and I can't conclude much. And I don't want to say there is no effect or there is an effect when the standard errors are really, really high. I don't remember if there was any other part in the question.
No. The most of them you have just answered. Thank you. But the other one that you raised now, it's in terms of language. You have used, I see, a very strong assumption in terms of language. But why do you don't use data on nationality to check if there is as a proxy to your to language into
because all these people are Swiss citizens, right?
Yeah.
So what do you mean by?
You cannot identify any proxies in terms of language diversity to check if this affects your results.
Something I wanted to do is to try to extrapolate this to international migrants, because most of the international migrants in Switzerland, at least in this data set, comes from Germany, Italy, France, and Portugal. And what you can see is that in terms of observables, they are quite similar to the Swiss. And then if you just, the problem is that for these international immigrants, I don't observe the trust level before they move, right? But if you just run a regression like controlling for the country of origin, you can still see a very strong correlation of the canton where they are and the trust level. The only issue is that I don't have the pre-trust. So I mean, I would be comfortable to like generalizing a bit, at least to this kind of immigrants.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And we had another question from Jeremy. So Jeremy, if you want to ask it directly.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Hey, Diego, really good job. My question was, you know, it's kind of a subtle point that maybe is hard to disentangle empirically, but, you know, what is changing when generalized trust changes? One is, you know, your inherent trust in others changes. Another is that the composition of the people around you changes.
Yes.
You could be in a place where people are more trustworthy in general. That's why generalized trust is generally higher. And that's something that changes immediately after migration. So that's kind of consistent with you finding very quick assimilation, which is interesting.
Yeah.
It could also be consistent with changes in generalized trust, but not in government trust or institutional trust, which if that's a federal level, you know, trust does not, the quality of those institutions doesn't change with internal migration. So wondering if you're thinking about that or if that's consistent with your interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, so now I'm just saying like people do change their trust. It's what it could be driven by one of these two mechanisms. I don't know which one it is, and that's why I'm doing this second project in which I have actually the trust and trustworthiness, and I want to see, because that's true. Maybe they are not really changing any personal trait. They are just observing some people that are different, and then they answer differently, right? But this at least what they report should affect their behavior in those places, right?